Marcus Chun adjusted the rough hemp string of his handmade bow as the alien laughter echoed through the cargo hold of the massive Zephyrian battleship. The sound reminded him of glass breaking mixed with the hiss of escaping steam. Around him, dozens of other humans sat chained to the cold metal walls, their faces bearing the same mixture of defiance and despair that had become commonplace since the invasion began 6 months ago. The Zephyrians were tall, elegant creatures with crystalline skin that shifted colors based on their emotions. Right now, their commander's hide glowed a vibrant purple, which Marcus had learned meant amusement bordering on contempt. Commander Vexthal stood nearly 8 feet tall, his forearms gesturing dramatically as he addressed his subordinates in their musical language. "Look at this primitive specimen," Vexthal said, switching to broken English for the human's benefit. "It carries a stick with string. How quaint." More laughter rippled through the alien crew. "Tell me, little mammal, what do you plan to do with that antique? Perhaps you will hunt for berries." Marcus remained silent, his weathered hands steady on his bow. At 52, he had been a forest ranger before the invasion, spending decades in the wilderness of Montana, tracking everything from deer to dangerous criminals. The aliens had found his group hiding in the mountains, taking them prisoner along with hundreds of others from the surrounding settlements. The bow in his hands was nothing special by human standards. Constructed from seasoned yew wood, it measured 6 feet from tip to tip with a draw weight of 75 pounds. Marcus had carved it himself during the early days of the Resistance, when ammunition for conventional weapons had become scarce. The arrows in his quiver were equally simple, ash shafts tipped with filed steel broadheads and fletched with turkey feathers. To the Zephyrians, who wielded energy weapons capable of melting through solid rock, the bow represented everything backward about humanity. They had conquered 17 different species across the galaxy, each one eventually abandoning their primitive weapons in favor of advanced technology. Humans were supposed to follow the same pattern. "Your species fascinates us," Vexthal continued, pacing back and forth on his digitigrade legs. "Every other race we have encountered immediately recognized the superiority of our technology. They begged to join our empire, to share in our advancement. But you humans—" He paused, his skin shifting to an orange hue indicating curiosity mixed with irritation. "You cling to your crude tools like children with security blankets." A younger Zephyrian officer, whose rank insignia marked him as Lieutenant Kelmar, stepped forward. His skin displayed the pale blue of respectful attention. "Commander, perhaps we should simply eliminate this group and move on to the next collection site. They have proven remarkably resistant to our standard conversion protocols." Vexthal held up one of his 4 hands, causing the lieutenant to step back. "Patience, Kelmar. These creatures provide entertainment. Besides, the High Command has specifically requested live specimens for their research facilities on Zephyr Prime. They wish to study what makes humans so stubbornly primitive." Marcus felt anger building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Around him, his fellow prisoners watched with varying degrees of hope and fear. There was Sarah Martinez, a veterinarian from Billings who had joined their resistance cell after losing her family in the initial bombardment. Next to her sat old Pete Kowalski, a Vietnam veteran whose knowledge of guerrilla warfare had kept their group alive for months in the wilderness. The cargo hold stretched for nearly 100 yards in each direction, its ceiling lost in shadows 40 feet above. Crates of confiscated human technology lined the walls. Everything from smartphones to military equipment rendered useless by the aliens' electromagnetic pulse weapons. The air recycling system hummed constantly, filtering out the harsh chemical smell of Zephyrian technology. "Tell me about your weapon." "Primitive," Vexthal demanded, pointing at Marcus with one of his elongated fingers. "How many of our warriors do you think it could kill?" "1? Perhaps 2 if you were exceptionally lucky." Marcus finally looked up, meeting the alien commander's multifaceted eyes. "I don't know," he said quietly. "Never tried it on your kind before." The response sent fresh waves of laughter through the Zephyrian crew. Vexthal's skin shifted to a deep red, indicating genuine mirth. "Such confidence from a species that still uses sharp sticks. Your ancestors mastered fire, then bronze, then iron, then steel. Yet here you sit, reverting to wood and string when faced with superior technology. Maybe that's because we know something you don't," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the chains binding his wrists. This comment caused the laughter to fade. Vexthal's skin darkened to a purplish black, a color Marcus had learned indicated dangerous anger. The commander's four arms spread wide in what appeared to be a threatening gesture among his species. Enlighten me, human. What could your primitive mind possibly comprehend that our advanced civilization has missed? Vexthal's voice carried a sharp edge that made several of the human prisoners shrink back against the wall. Marcus remained silent for a long moment, studying the alien commander. The Zephyrians were physically impressive with their crystalline exoskeletons and multiple limbs. Their technology bordered on miraculous, capable of faster-than-light travel and matter manipulation. But in 6 months of observing them, Marcus had noticed something interesting. They had grown soft. Every Zephyrian carried an energy weapon at their hip, sleek devices that could adjust their output from stunning to disintegration. They wore powered armor that enhanced their strength and protected them from most known weapons. Their ships were marvels of engineering, equipped with shields that could deflect nuclear warheads. But they had forgotten how to fight with their hands. Marcus had watched them struggle with basic physical tasks that any human child could manage. They relied entirely on their technology, becoming helpless when separated from it. During the initial invasion, human forces had learned that electromagnetic pulse weapons could temporarily disable Zephyrian equipment, leaving the aliens vulnerable for brief periods. The problem was that humans had also become increasingly dependent on technology, though not to the same extent as their conquerors. Marcus's background as a wilderness guide had taught him skills that most of his contemporaries had forgotten. He could track animals by their footprints, start fires without matches, and survive for weeks with nothing but what nature provided. Most importantly, he could kill silently at a distance with tools that would never register on alien sensors. Well, Vexthal pressed, his skin now showing streaks of yellow indicating impatience. Have you lost your tongue, primitive? Marcus smiled slightly, an expression that seemed to unnerve the Zephyrian commander. Just thinking about something my grandfather told me once. He fought in a war against an enemy that had better technology, better weapons, better equipment. But he won anyway. Impossible, lieutenant Kelmar interjected. Superior technology always defeats inferior technology. This is a fundamental law of warfare. Tell that to the Vietnamese. Pete Kowalski spoke up from his position against the wall. The old veteran's eyes held a hard gleam that made several aliens step back instinctively. Or the Afghans, or any number of folks who've sent technologically superior armies packing over the years. Vexthal turned his attention to Pete, his skin shifting through several colors as he processed this information. You speak of isolated incidents, anomalies. Our conquest of 17 different worlds proves that advanced technology inevitably triumphs. Maybe, Marcus said, drawing the commander's attention back to himself. Or maybe you just haven't run into the right kind of enemy yet. The alien leader's laugh was harsh and grating. And you believe humans represent this right kind of enemy? You who huddle in caves and fight with primitive weapons while we reshape your planet to our needs. Marcus didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked around the cargo hold, taking note of the positions of each Zephyrian guard. There were 12 of them, all armed with energy weapons, all confident in their technological superiority. The nearest one stood about 20 feet away, well within range of his bow. The chains binding the human prisoners were made of an advanced Zephyrian alloy that could withstand most conventional cutting tools. But Marcus had noticed something during his weeks in captivity. The aliens had made an assumption about human physiology that wasn't entirely accurate. Zephyrian hands were larger and bulkier than human hands, with thick, crystalline fingers that couldn't manipulate small objects with precision. They had designed the restraints with their own anatomy in mind, making them loose enough for Zephyrian comfort, but not accounting for the smaller size and greater flexibility of human joints. Marcus had been working at his bonds for days, gradually loosening them while maintaining the appearance of being securely restrained. The rough hemp string of his bow wasn't just a bowstring. It was specially treated with oils and waxes that made it incredibly strong and flexible. More importantly, it was thin enough to cut through skin if applied with sufficient pressure and patience. Your silence speaks volumes, Vexthal continued, apparently taking Marcus's lack of response as submission. Perhaps you begin to understand the futility of your situation. Your primitive weapons are useless against our technology. Your resistance is meaningless. Your species will join our empire, or it will be eliminated. Commander, another Zephyrian officer called from across the cargo hold. We are approaching the next collection point. Shall I prepare the pacification teams? Vexthal nodded, his skin shifting to a business-like gray. Yes, initiate standard protocols. These specimens can watch as we collect their fellow humans. Perhaps seeing the futility of resistance will help them accept their new reality. As the aliens began moving toward the exit, Marcus felt the last of his restraints give way. He remained perfectly still, waiting for the right moment. Around him, his fellow prisoners watched with growing despair as their captors prepared to enslave more of their kind. The Zephyrians had made many assumptions about humanity based on their observations and encounters with other species. They assumed humans would eventually abandon their primitive ways and embrace alien technology. They assumed the resistance movements would collapse once faced with overwhelming force. They assumed that capturing key leaders and population centers would break the human spirit. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that because something was primitive, it was ineffective. Marcus Chun was about to teach them otherwise. The Zephyrian battleship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star, its crystalline hull shimmering with refracted sunlight. Through the transparent viewing ports, Marcus could see the devastated landscape of what had once been Denver, Colorado. Alien structures now dotted the ruins, their organic curves and pulsing lights a stark contrast to the geometric remains of human architecture. Commander Vexthal stood at the main observation deck, his four arms clasped behind his back in a gesture that Marcus had learned indicated deep concentration among his species. The alien skin displayed a steady blue-green pattern, suggesting anticipation mixed with satisfaction. Around him, his crew worked at stations that looked more like living organisms than technological devices, their surfaces rippling and changing color in response to touch. Magnificent, is it not? Vexthal said without turning around. Your species fought so hard to build these crude monuments to your civilization. Concrete and steel, glass and plastic. All of it so fragile, so temporary. He gestured with one of his upper arms toward the alien structures below. Our bioarchitecture will last for millennia, growing and adapting to its environment rather than fighting against it. Marcus said nothing, but his mind was racing. The loose chains around his wrists felt like a comforting weight now that he knew he could slip them at will. His bow remained across his lap, apparently ignored by the guards who had grown accustomed to its presence over the past several weeks. The aliens viewed it as nothing more than a primitive curiosity, no more threatening than a child's toy. Sarah Martinez caught his eye from across the observation deck, where the human prisoners had been brought to witness their planet's transformation. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus could see the question in her eyes. She had noticed his subtle movements over the past few days, the way he had been testing his bonds and studying the alien crew's routines. The veterinarian was smart enough to realize that Marcus was planning something, but wise enough not to let it show on her face. The collection team's report ready status. Lieutenant Kelmar announced from his position at what Marcus assumed was a communication station. The device resembled a coral reef more than anything technological, with branching tendrils that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Excellent, Vexthal replied, finally, turning away from the viewing port. This particular settlement has shown remarkable resilience. Their underground networks have avoided our sensors for weeks. I am curious to see what makes them so effective. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The settlement below was Sanctuary, one of the largest remaining human holdouts. Nearly 3,000 people lived in the converted subway tunnels and natural cave systems beneath the city, including his daughter Emma and her two young children. The Resistance had worked for months to keep their location secret from Zephyrian sensors, but somehow the aliens had found them. Commander, another officer called out, this one from station that looked like a giant flower with crystalline petals. The pacification teams are encountering unexpected resistance. The humans appear to have prepared defensive positions. Vexthal's skin shifted to a darker hue, indicating mild irritation. Of course they have. These creatures never learn. Initiate standard suppression protocols. I want minimal casualties. These specimens are too valuable to waste. Through the viewing port, Marcus could see streams of energy weapons fire, lighting up the ruins below. Zephyrian assault troops, their powered armor gleaming in the afternoon sun, moved through the streets in precise formations. They advanced methodically toward concealed entrances to the underground sanctuary, their weapons set to stun rather than kill. The human defenders were putting up a fierce fight, using every trick they had learned during months of guerrilla warfare. Improvised explosive devices detonated among alien formations, temporarily disabling their energy shields. Sniper fire from concealed positions forced the Zephyrians to take cover, though their superior armor made human bullets largely ineffective. But Marcus could see that it was a losing battle. The aliens had overwhelming technological superiority, and their commanders were learning to adapt to human tactics. Each time the defenders tried a new strategy, the Zephyrians quickly developed countermeasures. Fascinating, Vexthal mused, watching the battle unfold. Your species displays remarkable creativity in warfare. These ambush tactics, the use of environmental factors, the coordination between separate groups, all quite impressive for such a primitive civilization. He turned to address the human prisoners directly, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with what Marcus had learned was Zephyrian amusement, but ultimately futile. Your weapons cannot penetrate our armor. Your explosives barely scratch our shields. Your courage is admirable, but courage alone cannot overcome physics. Old Pete Kowalski spat on the deck, earning shocked gasps from several Zephyrian crew members. Tell that to the boys at Thermopylae, you crystal-faced bastard. The alien commander's skin flushed with anger, shifting to the dangerous purplish-black that indicated he was considering violence. Your historical references are irrelevant, aged human. The Spartans you reference ultimately lost their battle, despite their supposed heroism. Yeah, but they made the Persians pay for it, Pete shot back. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes making the other guy bleed is what counts, even if you don't win. Marcus watched this exchange while mentally calculating distances and angles. The nearest guard was 18 feet away, well within the effective range of his bow. Commander Vexthal stood 22 feet from his position, slightly beyond optimal range, but still manageable for a skilled archer. The observation deck was roughly circular, with viewing ports taking up most of the outer wall and various control stations arranged in concentric rings. Most importantly, he had identified the ship's critical systems during his weeks of careful observation. The Zephyrians, despite their advanced technology, followed logical design principles. Life support, navigation, and power distribution all had physical connections and control nodes that could be damaged by conventional means. Commander, the communication officer's voice carried an edge of alarm. The resistance fighters are using some kind of electromagnetic pulse weapon. Our advanced teams have lost contact with command. Vexthal's attention snapped back to the battle below. Through the viewing port, Marcus could see several Zephyrian units standing motionless, their powered armor apparently dead. Human fighters emerged from concealment, attacking the disabled aliens with conventional weapons. Impossible, the commander muttered, his skin cycling through several colors rapidly. Our equipment is hardened against primitive electromagnetic interference. Not all of it, Marcus said quietly, causing every alien in the room to turn toward him. Your armor, your weapons, your vehicles, they're all powered by broadcast energy from your ships. Disrupt the transmission frequency, and all that fancy technology becomes dead weight. The silence that followed was deafening. Vexthal stared at Marcus with an expression that might have been surprise if he had possessed more human-like features. Around the observation deck, Zephyrian crew members exchanged glances, their skin colors shifting in patterns that Marcus couldn't interpret. How could you possibly know that? Lieutenant Kelmar demanded, his voice higher pitched than normal. That information is classified at the highest levels of our military hierarchy. Marcus smiled grimly. 6 months of watching you work. 6 months of seeing how your soldiers panic when their equipment fails. 6 months of noticing that your technology works perfectly until it doesn't. He paused, letting his words sink in. You've become so dependent on your gadgets that you've forgotten how to function without them. Impossible, Vexthal repeated, but his skin had shifted to a pale yellow that Marcus recognized as uncertainty. Our analysis of human technology indicated no capability for this kind of sophisticated interference. That's because you were looking for human technology, Sarah Martinez spoke up, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had spent years dealing with complex biological systems. You assumed we'd try to fight fire with fire, match your technology with our own. She gestured toward the battle below. But we learned something from observing your equipment. It's not as alien as you think. The commander's forearms spread wide in what Marcus had learned was a gesture of extreme agitation. Explain yourself, human. Your biotechnology follows the same basic principles as Earth organisms, Sarah continued, seemingly unaware of the weapons now pointed at her by nervous guards. Energy distribution through specialized pathways, centralized control systems, vulnerable points where disruption can cause cascading failures. She smiled coldly. We may not understand your science, but we understand biology. And everything biological has weaknesses. Marcus felt a surge of pride at his fellow prisoner's courage. Sarah was buying time, keeping the aliens distracted while their soldiers below continued to fall to human ingenuity. But he could see that Vexthul was growing more agitated by the moment, his skin cycling through increasingly violent color patterns. Enough, the commander roared, his voice carrying harmonics that made the human prisoners wince. I grow tired of this insubordination. Lieutenant Kelmar, order the orbital bombardment platform to target the resistance stronghold. If we cannot capture these primitives alive, we will eliminate them entirely. Commander, the High Command specifically requested live specimens from this world, Kelmar protested weakly. The High Command will have to be satisfied with what we have already collected, Vexthul snapped back. These humans are too dangerous to be allowed to continue their resistance. Better to rule over Ash than risk further humiliation. Marcus felt his blood run cold. An orbital bombardment would kill every man, woman, and child in Sanctuary, including his own family. The underground shelters that had protected them from conventional weapons would become death traps when struck by capital ship weaponry. He couldn't wait any longer. In one fluid motion, Marcus slipped his hands free of the loose restraints and grabbed his bow. The movement was so sudden and unexpected that the Zephyrian guards barely had time to register what was happening before he had an arrow knocked and drawn. The string cut into his fingers as he pulled it back to full draw. The familiar weight of the U would bow comforting in his hands. Around the observation deck, aliens were shouting in their musical language, energy weapons powering up with ominous humming sounds. But Marcus only had eyes for Commander Vexthul, who stood frozen in shock at the sudden turn of events. I wouldn't, Marcus said calmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. Tell your people to lower their weapons, or I put this arrow through your head. The alien commander's skin had gone completely white, a color Marcus had never seen before. You cannot be serious, primitive. That weapon cannot possibly penetrate my exoskeleton. Marcus smiled grimly. Want to find out? Time seemed frozen in the observation deck of the Zephyrian battleship. Marcus Chun stood with his bow drawn to full tension, the steel-tipped arrow aimed directly at Commander Vexthul's center mass. Around them, a dozen alien guards held their energy weapons in awkward positions, unsure whether to fire or follow their commander's lead. The arrow Marcus had selected was one of his best. The ash shaft was perfectly straight and balanced, while the broadhead had been hand-forged from a piece of high-carbon steel salvage from a wrecked car. He had sharpened it to surgical keenness using stones from a Montana riverbed, taking hours to achieve the perfect edge geometry. The fletching came from a wild turkey he had killed during the early days of the Resistance, when fresh meat was scarce and every calorie counted. To human eyes, it was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship representing thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about hunting and warfare. To Zephyrian sensors, it was completely invisible, just organic and metallic materials arranged in patterns their technology couldn't recognize as weapons. This is absurd, Lieutenant Kelmar said, his skin displaying rapid color changes that Marcus interpreted as panic. Commander, a primitive projectile weapon cannot possibly threaten your exoskeleton. Our armor specifications show resistance to impact velocities up to dash silence, Vexthul commanded, his voice carrying a note that Marcus had never heard before. If he didn't know better, he might have thought it was fear. Human, You have approximately 30 seconds before my crew overwhelms you with energy weapons. Even if you manage to release the projectile, you will die immediately afterward. Marcus kept his aim steady, feeling the familiar burn in his shoulders and back muscles as he held the bow at full draw. 75 pounds of tension wasn't something he could maintain indefinitely, but he had practiced this exact scenario countless times in the wilderness. His body knew how to distribute the load, how to find that perfect balance point where strength met precision. Maybe, he agreed calmly, but you'll be dead before your people can pull their triggers. And once I kill you, what do you think happens to their chain of command? Through his peripheral vision, Marcus could see his fellow prisoners watching in stunned silence. Sarah Martinez had gone completely still, recognizing that any sudden movement might trigger a firefight that would kill them all. Old Pete Kowalski wore an expression of grim satisfaction, as if he had been waiting his entire captivity for this moment. You underestimate our technology, Vexthal said, but his skin had shifted to a mottled pattern that Marcus had learned indicated deep uncertainty. My exoskeleton is constructed from biocrystalline materials that can withstand plasma weapons. Your primitive arrow would simply shatter upon impact. That's what you keep telling yourself, Marcus replied. But I've been watching your people for 6 months. I've seen how you move, how you fight, how you react when things don't go according to plan. He paused, adjusting his grip slightly on the bowstring. You know what I noticed? Your armor is designed to deflect energy weapons. The crystalline structure disperses heat and electromagnetic radiation beautifully. But kinetic impact? Physical projectiles? That's not something you've had to worry about for a long time. The observation deck fell silent except for the ambient hum of alien technology. Through the viewing ports, the battle for Sanctuary continued to rage, but the immediate focus had shifted to the deadly standoff playing out aboard the battleship. Marcus could see doubt creeping into the commander's posture. Vexthal's forearms had moved to a defensive configuration, and his skin continued to cycle through colors that suggested internal conflict. The alien leader was clearly running calculations, trying to determine whether his armor could actually stop an arrow fired at close range. Even if your assessment is correct, Vexthal said slowly, you accomplish nothing by killing me. My death would simply trigger automatic protocols that would bombard your settlement even more thoroughly. You would be trading your life and the lives of your fellow prisoners for absolutely no gain. Would I? Marcus asked. See, that's another thing I learned about your people. You're hierarchical, rigid. When the chain of command gets disrupted, you don't adapt well. How long would it take for Lieutenant Kelmar there to assume command? How long to verify his authority with your high command? How long for the orbital platform to receive new targeting orders? Commander Vexthal's skin had gone almost completely black, a color Marcus had never seen before. You cannot possibly believe that buying a few minutes of delay would make any difference. Minutes can make all the difference in the world. Pete Kowalski spoke up, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. Ask anyone who's ever been in a real fight. Hell, ask anyone who's ever tried to coordinate a military operation. Timing is everything. Marcus nodded without taking his eyes off the alien commander. My people down there aren't just hiding in caves anymore. They're fighting back with everything they've learned about your technology. Every minute you delay gives them more time to disable your forces, more time to evacuate civilians, more time to implement countermeasures you haven't thought of yet. Impossible, Lieutenant Kelmar interjected. Our tactical analysis shows that human resistance capabilities are insufficient to dash. Your tactical analysis is wrong, Sarah Martinez interrupted. It's been wrong from the beginning because you've been analyzing us like we're any other species you've conquered. But we're not. Her voice carried a confidence that made several guards take nervous steps backward. We're the species that survived ice ages and supervolcanic eruptions. We're the species that fought 2 global wars with increasingly destructive technology and somehow managed not to extinct ourselves. We're the species that splits atoms for fun and sends robots to other planets just to see what's there. She gestured toward Marcus and his drawn bow. And we're the species that never forgot how to kill things with sharp sticks. The standoff continued for several more seconds, with neither side willing to make the first move. Marcus could feel the strain in his muscles building, but he also sensed that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic. The The Zephyrians were no longer acting with their previous confidence. Doubt had crept into their certainty about human capabilities. "Commander," came a new voice from the communication station. "Priority transmission from the orbital bombardment platform. They report anomalous readings from the planet's electromagnetic field. Requesting permission to delay targeting until delay nothing." Vexthal snapped, his attention momentarily diverted from Marcus. "Fire immediately. Target coordinates have already been transmitted." It was the opening Marcus had been waiting for. In a split second that the alien commander's focus shifted away from him, he made his choice. The bowstring sang as he released the arrow, sending 75 pounds of stored energy into propelling the projectile across the observation deck. The Zephyrians had made their fundamental error in assuming that primitive meant ineffective. They had analyzed human technology and found it wanting compared to their own advanced systems. They had observed human weapons and dismissed them as crude and outdated. They had even studied human biology and concluded that the species was physically inferior to most galactic civilizations. But they had never truly understood what made humans dangerous. The arrow covered the 22 feet between Marcus and Commander Vexthal in less than a tenth of a second. The crystalline exoskeleton that could deflect plasma bolts and disperse energy weapons proved completely useless against 6,000 years of accumulated human knowledge about putting sharp objects through living targets. The broadhead punched through the alien's chest with a wet sound that echoed through the observation deck. Vexthal looked down in shock at the arrow protruding from his body, his skin cycling through rapid color changes before settling on a gray that Marcus instinctively knew meant death. The Zephyrian commander collapsed backward, his forearms spreading wide as his nervous system shut down. Around the observation deck, his crew stood frozen in disbelief, their weapons still raised, but their training apparently inadequate for processing what had just happened. Lieutenant Kelmar was the first to recover, his skin flashing bright red as he raised his energy weapon toward Marcus. "Kill them. Kill them all." But Marcus was already moving, rolling behind one of the alien control stations as energy bolts sizzled through the air where he had been standing. The other human prisoners scattered, seeking whatever cover they could find among the organic-looking alien equipment. The revolution aboard the Zephyrian battleship had begun with a single arrow fired by a man who remembered that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. And as energy weapons discharged and aliens shouted in their musical language, Marcus Chun reached for another arrow and prepared to teach them exactly why humanity had survived everything the universe had thrown at them so far.